Hello everybody, and welcome to Awesome Epic Guys with Edvin20.
And Swatch.
Today's video is going to be a little bit special. Me and Swatch, we are known for comical videos. I know comedy is subjective, but I think a lot of people would describe us as clowns in the World of Tanks community, and we are not to be taken very seriously for the most part.
But today's video is going to be a discussion video. It's going to be a serious discussion video, at least as serious as it can be around these parts of the internet.
Today, me and Swatch are gonna have a little discussion with you about why we think that Tier 10 is not a very enjoyable experience anymore.
Big disclaimer, this is based on our opinions and experiences. This is definitely a subjective topic, which is why we're just gonna discuss it from our own experiences and opinions. If you do already enjoy Tier 10, that's completely fine. Just go and have fun in Tier 10. There's nothing wrong with that.
However, me and Swatch think that Tier 10 can be and should be more enjoyable, considering it's supposed to be the end game of World of Tanks. So when it comes to skill level, if you like, me and Swatch, I would consider us to be more towards the casual side of World of Tanks and less into the hardcore competitive gamers. So if you absolutely love playing Tier 10 and you love to spam premium rounds in your chieftain as a hardcore tryhard, that's absolutely fine. But we don't belong in that category. We enjoy to play this game for the memes and for the fun of it. So everything that we are about to discuss in this video, you should take it with a grain of salt.
Or should I say a shovel of salt.
Oh, here we go in the meme Swatch shovel! And before we dig into this amazing topic of Tier 10, it's gonna be a discussion video as we just stated, which means that we would love to hear your experiences and opinions and bold claims down in the comments below. We would love to have a little discussion going. We will try and read every single comment we get. Maybe you guys completely disagree with everything we have to say, or maybe you have something completely different on your mind that you want to share with us. So please do that in the comments, and I will see you there.
So one of the reasons we wanted to make this video is we don't think Tier 10 has been bad always. Back when we started playing this game back in 2011, we enjoyed Tier 10, but it was a very much different environment in World of Tanks back then. And a lot of things have changed, which is probably why we don't enjoy it as much currently. So when we started playing Tier 10 back in the day, we were derping around in our Jag Panzers on Dragon Ridge. And the overpowered meta tanks were like the Batchat 25T and the T62A. So it's pretty different to your current World of Tanks environment.
You could argue that it's because we have grown more into World of Tanks and have started taking the game a bit more seriously than we used to, but both of us think that World of Tanks at Tier 10, back in our day, could be enjoyed at a more casual level.
We are not 100% sure to why exactly we think our opinions have changed about this tier, but we have a list of things that we could potentially be reasons to why this has happened. Some of the problems and issues we're gonna list here can definitely be applied to all the other tiers in the game, but we think they are most prevalent in Tier 10.
These are just some points that me and Swatch brainstormed up together before making this video. I'm sure there are a lot more points that we missed, and we would love to hear that in the comments. And again, these are based on our opinions and experiences. So, number one on why we believe that Tier 10 has become worse over the years. Number one, probably the most obvious, and it's very common in, well, basically all games that are older than a couple of years. Power creep. As we were talking about earlier, back in our day when we started playing Tier 10 and enjoyed it, tanks like the T62A and the Batchat 25T, they were considered like hardcore meta because they were mobile. Or the T62A had a high rate of fire, accurate gun, it had great turret armor, and there weren't really that much at Tier 10 that could like compete with it. And you had tanks like the Batchat that was more for specialist kind of players. I personally loved it because it was basically the only tank at high tier that could do a lot of damage in a short period of time. And these days, if you bring out a tank like T62A or the Batchat into, let's say, a ranked battle at Tier 10, you would be considered a maniac, because they're just not good anymore.
This is actually a pretty understandable process. Wargaming needs to pump out new content for players to be interested in playing the game for a extended amount of period. But the consequence of this is that they need to make the tanks more powerful, more interesting all the time for people to be interested in actually trying the new tanks. For example, when they implement tanks that are not very interesting or good, like the British Lights or the Chinese tank destroyers, nobody plays them.
It's a waste of time for wargaming and resources to implement non-interesting tank lines. So they have to make them interesting and good to make it worth their time.
But the problem with this is, of course, power creep. Old tanks become obsolete, new tanks replace other tanks, like for example the Progetto 65 has pretty much completely took the Batchat 25T's role, and Death Star has kind of taken Jagdpanzer's role, and etc, etc.
And the EBR has practically killed every other tier 10 light in the game.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk more into like solutions to this later down the line, so don't you worry. For now, we're just gonna list all the issues, and the possible solutions are gonna come further down, so don't you guys worry. Another thing along with power creep, well, I guess it's a kind of a category of its own, but it kind of belongs to power creep. It's the armor of the game, and this has been a very sensitive topic for many years. But if you compare armor these days to when we started playing World of Tanks, you barely recognize it. When me and Swart started playing the game, it didn't matter if you were playing like low tier or tier 10. Most tanks had like the same kind of layout. If they had a lot of armor, they usually had a lower plate, they usually had like a machine gun port or a driver's hatch or a cupola on top, like 1, 2, 3, low, middle, top, where you could hit and penetrate. If you were shooting a standard round in a tier 8 tank against a tier 10 tank and you managed to hit the weak spot, you would penetrate it. That's not really how it looks these days. These days you need to be firing premium rounds at weak spots.
It feels very random to how the armor layout is constructed in every tank. You have to like have specific knowledge to each and every vehicle in the entire game to actually know where their weak spots are, if any.
This obviously goes hand in hand with premium rounds, but that's a category we're going to talk about in a little moment. The next issue along in power creep has to be the reward tanks, especially at tier 10.
During recent years, like 1, 2, 3 years back, Wargaming decided that they wanted to reward the skilled players at high tier by giving them reward tanks for doing well in clan wars, etc, etc. You know, I support this idea with rewarding good players with some good juicy trophies or something, but this has become kind of a problem because they reward you with a pretty good tank that is just better than the rest of the competition. Best players become even better, making the casual players they don't stand a chance.
We actually had a discussion with a Wargaming employee maybe a year or two ago. I'm not gonna mention this person's name, but the problem with tier 10 reward tanks for clan wars back in the day is that they really try to go with the unique approach instead of the overpowered approach. For example, I remember my first clan wars campaign, I managed to get the German VK7 to whatever the heck it's called. It was basically gameplay wise a less armored but quicker E100. But the problem with that is that they weren't very popular inside the community. Basically, the pro players meant that we're putting all this time and effort, we want a good tank, goddammit. And then they started coming up with tanks like the 907 and tanks like, well, the Chieftain, which is probably the most overpowered tank in the whole game. And now all these tanks have been given out to so many players, and it's obvious that it's overpowered. Wargaming are fully aware of this. But again, it's not like they can just take those tanks back or nerf them. So Wargaming themselves, they don't know what to do about this issue. But the issue remains is that the reward tanks are way better than they should be at tier 10, which is supposed to be like the end game of World of Tanks. And if you are just a casual player trying to enjoy or even be just slightly competitive, just try to not suck at the game, it's gonna be pretty hard, you know, derping around in your E100 and then all you're going up against are gold spamming chieftains and 279Es. It's not a very enjoyable experience.
The next point is gold ammunition / special ammunition.
Special!
When we started playing this game, angling your tank was, it mattered.
We're not kidding, it actually did matter. It made a huge difference if you knew how to angle or not.
Yes, there were like so many tutorials on YouTube, like how to angle your tank properly, side scraping and all that amazing stuff. Nowadays it's just dab the 2 key, shoot them through the mouth and pen them.
Or you're playing a tank with so much turret armor that people just simply can't pen you. It's either they can't pen you, or they can pen you with premium rounds. There is no middle ground here.
And the meta has almost evolved to adapt that people spam premium rounds. Like, that's probably why they have increased the armor to many vehicles as well.
So if you're just casually playing around at tier 10 and you're trying to shoot at as little premium rounds as possible, you're not gonna have a great experience shooting at heavily armored tier 10s, because they are basically balanced around you firing premium rounds. Which is frankly ridiculous compared to the game we started playing in 2011's Watch. It's not just stupid and frustrating and very expensive, but it's also lost a bit of the charm at playing World of Tanks, especially at high tier, because I remember you, Swatch, when you got into this game, like the whole angling part and the weak spot part was what really caught your attention to this game. This is really what sets World of Tanks apart from all the other shooters, at least back in the day. But you still have it at low tier, you even have it to some degree at tier 10, but at tier 10 it just feels so much just spam premium rounds at people or go hold down with turrets that nobody could ever dream of penetrating. And there's just so much love of the game that is just gone out the window.
I'd say World of Tanks at its core is a real-time strategy shooter. But a lot of that strategy, when it involves armor, has just disappeared, and it's mostly just ammunition and positioning on the map.
Yeah.
The armor thing has just disappeared completely almost.
The next point is artillery at tier 10. If you have been watching literally any of our live streams or YouTube videos, you are fully aware that we are not huge fans of artillery. But at tier 10, one of our main issues about artillery is that most games that you join when you are playing tier 10 tanks, they are full tier 10 games. And because this game has been around for almost 10 years now, all artillery players, or most artillery players, they have completed their grinds. And as there are almost no to little premium artillery tanks to play, people just find and pick their favorite artillery piece, which is probably going to be like something like maybe an M44, or they're going to play tier 10s because it's high tier.
There haven't been any artillery pieces introduced since like the British nation, I think.
Yeah, British nation was the last one.
So people who like to play artillery has probably unlocked all their favorite artillery pieces long time ago, and they're all crowded up at tier 10.
Yeah. This creates the problem where almost every game where you play tier 10 is going to be a full tier 10 game, and in almost every one of those there will be 3 tier 10 players, tier 10 artillery players, I should say, who's gonna be taking huge dumps on the enemy team all day long. Now, Wargaming have made a lot of positive improvements to artillery over the years. When we started playing, there was, for example, there was no cap to artillery. They could literally be 15 versus 15 artillery. There are screenshots out there and videos. It's hilarious if you want to go and watch that from the early days of World of Tanks. That's obviously very stupid. There have also been changes to like how they're almost like the whole class has been almost revamped. They're still sitting in the back clicking at people. But previously, when we started playing this game, artillery was very much hit and miss. They hit you and you died, because you were probably standing still too long. They were also horribly inaccurate. It took a very long time to aim, all that jazz. These days though, it doesn't really matter if they hit you or not. It doesn't really matter how you position yourself. They can hit you and do some damage, or they can hit next to you and do a little less damage, and stun you for 30 seconds, which means, I'm not saying that it was necessarily better back in the day where you can get one-shotted and artillery was shooting armor piercing in heat rounds, but nowadays it really feels like there's just no escape.
It's a constant presence from artillery at tier 10.
Mainly because of the stunning and the splashing. They're not necessarily gonna one-shot kill you or anything, even though it does happen from time to time. You can't escape it. That's the main issue, and this problem is present practically throughout the whole game. But you start noticing it a lot more maybe at like tier 6, where the stunning mechanics is kicked in. Again, not saying it was better before the stunning mechanics, but as Swash was saying, it's a constant presence of artillery at high tier, because it doesn't matter what you do, because they are accurate enough and they are fast firing enough and they have such enormous splash radius that it doesn't matter where you are, you're never safe.
The next point is the Matchmaker, which it has obviously improved over the years a lot actually, which is very nice, thank you Wargaming. But at tier 10, when you start a battle, you will most likely end up in a full tier 10 game, which is, you know, kinda nullifies the reward of playing a tier 10 tank. So one of the most rewarding things about climbing a tech tree for us is, you know, the sense of becoming stronger and the sense of progression, unlocking a new tank and experiencing new features and feeling mightier than the previous tier. But since tier 10 is mostly tier 10 only, you seldom feel this sense of power or progression.
We're not saying that every game you should be top tier slaughtering tier 8 tanks, but it would be nice if you could sometimes feel a little bit more powerful when you're driving your tier 10. For the most part, I would rather be like a tier 9 tank in a tier 10 game rather than a tier 10 tank in a full tier 10 game, if that makes any sense. To put it very short, it doesn't feel as rewarding as it should when you finally reach tier 10 with the current matchmaking. We don't have a great solution to this. Possibly could be to remove, for example, +2. We've always hated +2. We've always hated the idea of going up against tanks that you can't do anything against, or to play against tanks that don't stand a chance against you. We know there are some thoughts behind it, but we personally don't agree with it. When you finally reach tier 10, it would be enjoyable to at least more often feel a bit more powerful, because these days
feel more rewarded for going through the entire tech tree, basically.
Yeah, because it feels like once you finally reach the top, for example, let's say that you've been grinding up towards the Jagdpanzer E100 as you were doing Swatch, and you finally want to feel powerful and screw over some noobs. Then the next wall hits you, is that everyone is super good at the game, every tank you go up against is like a tryhard tier 10 gold spamming 3 marker who sees your tank as nothing but a pile of snacks. So even though it's a leveled playing field, it doesn't feel like it.
I could visualize a World of Tanks tier progression. It would go like a progressive slope, like, oh yeah, I'm climbing towards the top, and then it peaks at tier 9. This is like the perfect tier.
I think a lot of people argue that tier 9 is like the best tier in the game.
Yes, and when you reach tier 10, it's just you're dropped into a pit of fire. It's just such a sudden influx of extremes, and we will talk about this very short amount of time.
That brings us into the next point, as Swatch was talking about this the pit of fire.
Extreme tanks we talked about earlier. To make the game interesting and keep players hooked to the game, Wargaming needs to implement new and interesting features to the game, and this can end up in peculiar tanks, as we like to call it, extreme features, such as wheel tanks, double barrels, almost 2k alpha damage, 183mm guns, the siege mode, turbo mechanics, auto reloaders, all that jazz, you know. Features with extreme abilities.
Features with wow factors that make people excited to grind up the tech tree towards tier 10.
We're not against features, we're not saying that, but it can definitely go overboard with like the Death Star and the shit barn, for example.
And this becomes even more clear when, as we were talking about earlier about the matchmaking, when you take 15 versus 15 of these extreme tanks, because let's be real, most people, I'm sure there are some of you out there, but most people don't play tier 10 playing your casual tanks like the E50M or the 140 or the T110E5. People want to play tanks that have these extreme features because it's fun and enjoyable, and I think that as well. What tanks do people play? They play autoloaders, they play their shit barns, they play their artillery, they play their EBRs, they play tanks that have these extreme abilities because it's fun. And then you take 15 versus 15 of that, and it becomes this pit of fire that you were talking about, Swatch.
This results in like the mediocre jack-of-all-trade tanks becoming even more mediocre. Like, take for example, I don't know, the IS-4. Sure, it's a good tank, but why play the IS-4 when you can play the freaking Death Star or the 60 TP? I don't know, they have bigger guns.
279E.
Exactly. The spectrum of stats at tier 10, they just go all over the place.
We're not like talking down on Wargaming for introducing all these features, because again, it belongs with power creep and the age of the game. They're trying to introduce new features to keep people interested. If it wasn't for these features, even every new tank to the game would have been like a new T62A. This game would have probably died many years ago. We believe that the main problem is so exaggerated when you take so many of them and put them together, which also kind of belongs to the previous topic, the matchmaking.
So the consequence when you put these extremes in the same cauldron of soup, problem that happens is that the game becomes very much more punishing. Like, you have this in the tech tree. I think the flow of the game is very progressive. You can usually take a few hits and make a few mistakes throughout the tiers.
Which is also what makes World of Tanks so much fun for me.
I could risk going around this corner in a tier 8 or whatever, and I might take a few hits, but I'll probably live. But at tier 10 it's like, okay, there could be like 3 Death Stars around this corner. I have 2,000 hit points, that's a lot of hit points, but not to a Death Star, And I could risk going to this bush where there might be a wheel tank going around and spotting the entire team.
I could try and make this dash, but there might be a Swedish tank destroyer in that bush that we won't be able to see until we're inside proximity range. Or I could try and make this dash, but there might be 3 autoloaders around the corner that I haven't seen yet. Even though you have these all these hit points, all this armor, it is still extremely punishing to be playing at tier 10.
I don't feel safe regardless of my armor values at tier 10. There's just so many things to take in consideration before doing literally anything at tier 10.
And this soup becomes even more of a fire-breathing soup when you add the fact that this is supposed to be the end game content, which it is, and it should be, and we want it to be more enjoyable. Is that there are a lot of good players at tier 10. I know people are probably just laughing, oh, I've seen Steve in his IS-7 and he sucks. Yes, but if you take the average tier 10 player and compare him to the average tier 4 or 5 or 6 player, the tier 10 player will on average be a lot more, well, less incompetent, let's just put it like that, which makes this punishing that we were just talking about even more clear, because there are less people everywhere making mistakes, which means if you make a mistake or you take a risk, you will be even more punished. And this is noticed even more when you are playing the ranked game mode. If you have played tier 10 ranked in World of Tanks, if you make one little mispeak, you're dead. Doesn't matter if you have 2,500 hit points, doesn't matter if you have all the armor in the world, because it is so incredibly punishing.
I don't think the issue of extremities is the main issue, but more like what the extremities causes to the gameplay.
Yep.
It's more punishing, and the flow of the game becomes more stale and lame.
Next point, Swatch.
The next point on our list of things that we think has changed our opinion about tier 10 over the years into not liking tier 10 is that it's a lot easier for anyone to unlock a tier 10 nowadays. With like the huge influx of boosters, like credit boosters and free experience boosters and regular experience boosters and missions, top of the tree,
blueprints,
events. So much things that just stacks on top of each other. Free premium time from missions and all that jazz. There's so many boosts that let the tech tree progression become a lot easier nowadays than when we started playing back in the day, which obviously means that there's a lot of more inexperienced players playing tier 10 as well, which will then be mixed with good players, becoming kind of a even crazier soup than the already crazy soup.
So you have the Tryhards trying to 3-mark their chieftains along with Steves, who just got their IS-7, and it becomes a very inconsistent experience on top of everything. I still stand by the fact that the average player is still better at tier 10, but when we started playing tier 10, most people had gone through the same journey as me and Swatch, grinding through a whole tech tree. Like, that was a real struggle, Swatch, reaching a tier 10. That was an accomplishment, which also exaggerates the issue that we were talking about earlier with the extreme tanks. When Wargaming introduce a new extreme tank, let's say that tomorrow they introduce a triple barrel shit barn, with all the boosters in the game, within a couple of months, everyone who wants to get it is gonna have it. Next point, this This point kind of goes hand in hand with the power creep and the armor that we were talking about earlier, but at tier 10 this is so clearly visible that it's almost sickening, especially when you play the ranked game mode. Tier 10 has become so much hold down meta that it's absolutely ridiculous. So when me and Swatch started playing this game, finding tanks that could go hold down or even finding hold down positions, that was kind of like a neat thing. That was like a cool strategy you could apply. Like, oh, with my American tank I can go hold down and it has strong turret armor and it's really good, and yeah, the i7 he can side scrape, but I can go hold down. But these days there are just so many meta tanks that are just built around having a super strong turret and to just sit hold down being practically
impenetrable.
So you either have to make him turn his turret, flank him or something, or just fire high explosive in his face. And we have so many tanks that are considered, well, quite meta. We have tanks like the STB-1, the Chieftain, Kranvagn, all of Super Conqueror. When these tanks are hold down at tier 10, what are you supposed to do? There is almost nothing you can do about it. If you compare this tier 10 meta to when we started playing this game and enjoyed tier 10, or if you just drop down a few tiers in today's World of Tanks, it's completely different. Most tanks have weak spots at the top of their turrets. Most tanks have lower plates. Most tanks have machine gun ports you can penetrate. At tier 10 these days, that is practically just out the window. Nope, we don't want that.
They usually have like a tiny, cupola on the top.
Yeah, we can look at the Kranvagn in my garage here. So if you're looking straight at him, yeah, he got a tiny cupola here on the left side. When he uses his gun depression, forget it, you're never gonna hit it. I don't even think you can hit it when he uses his gun depression. We have tanks like the Super Conqueror. He has a cupola, but like you need to hit it like smack on, and again, if he uses his gun depression, you can't hit it. Tanks like the Chieftain, same story. Yeah, it has a cupola, but when he uses his gun depression, you can't hit it. And even if you do hit it, you probably need premium rounds to pen it. And this is like same story across the board with so many new meta tanks these days. Yeah. The hold down meta is just, it's lame, it's boring, it's sickening, and I wouldn't have any problems with it if hold down tanks just had proper weak spots, like the T110E5. I would argue that thing is a bit broken as well because the cupola is kind of troll, but at least there's something sticking out. Same thing with the Patton or the T110E4. ST2 has this as well. I believe the Russian mediums have it as well, even though they are kind of troll and hard to pen as well. But just give us something to shoot at that you can like actually reliably hit, and you don't have to spam premium rounds at it.
So the final point on which why we think we don't enjoy tier 10 as much anymore is Tryhards. This is not really an issue, it's just a fact, it's just how it is. People end up at tier 10 and they stay there because it's the most competitive tier. It's just how things are. It's not an issue, it's just a fact. It becomes a problem for me and Edwin, for example, who are more leaning towards the casual player side. For example, I think a few years back we tried to record a Death Star Platoon of Justice video, and we sat for like 2 hours trying to make things happen, but the gameplay was just so stale and it wasn't representative of what we wanted to show. It was just sitting around on our asses waiting for things to happen, which is just, it's not really that kind of gameplay that we want to show on this channel. So it's more of a personal issue than a general issue, but I think many people will relate to this problem, at least.
This is probably the main cause to why me and Swatch are as much as possible avoiding tier 10 on YouTube videos and during live streams, because especially when we are live in front of eyes, in front of people watching us, we are trying to put on a show. We're not always trying to do everything possible to get the best results. That is not really what we're not 3 markers. We're not collecting mastery badges. We're not trying to get the best damage scores possible ever, even though I do like damage. But we're trying to put on a show. We're trying to make people laugh. We're trying to have a good time. And playing tier 10 with so many tryhards in so many competitive tanks when the environment is so punishing, it's just not very enjoyable. And it's not really an issue with the game. It becomes an issue because of how we want to play tier 10.
So, now that all the whining is out of the way, now let's try and discuss some solutions to all this whining. We're not in any way like professional game designers, but we're professional idiots, and we have played this game for a very long time, so trust us. First one is, the simplest fix to all of this, and that's just rebalancing tanks. Wargaming has already started trying to rebalance all the tanks, like the E100, E50M, Kranvagn, IS-4, E5, and there's more coming. But all these changes are taking a very long time to implement into the game, and they don't really change the environment as drastically as we might prefer. And the buffs given to these tanks mentioned, it's good that they're doing something, but in our opinion it's not doing enough. Like, sure, you buffed the IS-4 and you buffed the E5 to some extent, but there's still no reason to play these tanks over the meta tanks. We're perfectly aware that it's like impossible to make a completely balanced game if you still want to keep these like peculiarities and interesting features in all tanks. We'd like to argue that there are very few tanks that are actually worth playing if you want to do good at tier 10. We would like to argue that the amount of tanks that are competitive or just even fun to play, worth your while, they are very few in numbers. As I mentioned, why would you play the E5 when you can play the Chieftain? They have remotely the same playstyle, but Chieftain does everything better. And if you just want to have fun at tier 10, sure, that Shitbarn, for example, it might not be the best of tanks, but it is a fun tank to play.
But not very much against.
And the Shitbarn, for example, makes other tank destroyers pretty obsolete. Like, why would you want to play the Object 268, or why would you want to play the Chinese tier 10 tank destroyer when you have a Death Star or a Shitbarn to choose from, which does like double the alpha damage and are more flexible tanks. In a nutshell, there needs to be more tanks that are worth your while.
If you are a competitive World of Tanks player at tier 10, which we are not, but if you are, there are currently about 60 tier 10 tanks currently in the game, and that includes artillery lines and the tier 10 reward tanks. Now, how many of these, roughly speaking, 60 tier 10 tanks are competitive, as if you should pick these tanks if you want to win, if you want to do damage, if you want to perform well inside the ranked game mode, for example, or maybe tanks that are very good in clan wars? How many of these 60?
So out of these 60 vehicles available to you, we would say there are roughly, based on our own opinions, statistics and opinions from other creators, we would say that 12 out of these 60 tanks are worth your time.
The 12 tanks we are currently talking about, first of all, we have the Chieftain, the tier 10 British reward tank, which is arguably the best tank in the game, period. It's an amazing tank, and it's only available as a reward tank, which kinda sucks. Then we have the 279E, which is also a reward tank, which kinda sucks. However, this tank can be obtained inside the campaign missions, so it's more obtainable for average players more than, let's say, that Chieftain, unless you're doing clan wars. But it's still very hard to obtain. Most people will never be able to obtain the 279E. And then we also have the Object 907, which is also a Clan Wars reward tank. And then we have the EBR 105, which has practically made every other light tank in the game completely obsolete. We have the 430U, even after the so-called nerfs. We have tanks like the Super Conqueror, 277, the STB-1, that thing is just insane gun depression. Kranvagn, we have the Progetto, and yes, even after the nerfs, we do consider the Progetto to be pretty meta. We also have the Object 268 version 4, it may not be highly competitive,
but it's very easy to play.
And if you want to include an artillery piece in this list, we have gone for the Conqueror gun carriage, because it hits like a truck, and you can hit anywhere on the map, practically ignoring buildings, mountains, cover, the game. You could stretch this list way further if you like, and you can also narrow it even more if you would like that as well. But just for me and Swatch brainstorming together, we came to the conclusion there are about 12 tanks in the game that are considered highly meta, that you see a lot in Clan Wars and inside the ranked game mode. Maybe we have forgotten a tank somewhere, please let us know in the comments. But these are the 12 tanks that we have come up with.
You could practically narrow this down to 3 tanks though, like the Chieftain, EBR, and 279E. If you have any of these tanks, you don't really need to play anything else to win in this game.
If you watch high level competitive Clan Wars, in esports, these are the only tanks you see, and it's so incredibly lame, and it really speaks for itself what the balance is like in this game.
The easiest solution to make a more interesting and dynamic game, where there are more tanks to be interested in than just reward tanks, would just to be nerf the reward tanks. It's a simple solution that also comes with other set of problems. For example, the people who have been struggling to get these reward tanks for a very long time that are now upset because they're the thing that they have been struggling to get for these many years, or I don't know how long time they have been doing this. Their reward is now not the same, but at the same time we have all been grinding from tier 1 to tier 10 for a very long time, and we don't really get upset when they rebalance the other tier 10 tanks. So personally, I don't see this as a problem, and it would be healthy for the game and a pretty simple solution.
Another huge problem, and this is something that Wargaming themselves have recognized as we've been having little discussions or chats with them, is that let's just say that you would just straight up nerf these tier 10 reward tanks like the Chieftain, the 279E, the 907, all these overpowered ones, is that many of the players who are playing these are the biggest customers of Wargaming. They've been playing this game for a very long time. They buy, well, a lot of premium tanks, they buy a lot of gold, they convert a lot of experience, they train a lot of their crews, retraining with gold, they run premium account non-stop, and it would be very not so very beneficial for Wargaming to upset their biggest customers by nerfing their best tank. It's not an easy problem to solve. Another solution, this approach they have kind of already been taking, but still not very obtainable for most average Joes or below average players, is that you could just try and sell these tanks for bonds, for example. Currently we have tanks in the bond shop that are like previous reward tanks, like the M60 or the 121B or whatever it's called.
But these are all actually balanced.
Yes. These are like actually balanced. I wouldn't consider any one of those to be better or worse than their, let's say, tech tree counterpart. But an easy solution could just be to just throw the Chieftain in there. I mean, maybe that would make the problem even worse, but at least everyone will be able to go and buy it and put it at a set price, because currently the only way to get the Chieftain, which is probably the most desired tank in the game right now, is to play Clan Wars during these special events and to do really well to earn enough points. Or if you fail that, which most people will, you can take part in an auction if you have played X amount of games inside a Clan Wars event. And this is how Steve, with his 45% win rate, can obtain a Chieftain, which I think is a good thing. But the problem is here is because everyone wants these tanks so unbelievably bad, and because they are at a very limited amount every time, the prices are just astronomical. I believe last time there was a Clan Wars event, I think I bid like around 40-45k. I was trying to get the Object 907 and it wasn't
Bonds, that is.
Yeah, bonds, yes, bonds. And I didn't get it. And I believe it's different depending on regions, but I believe in Europe you had to go up, I guess, like 60 or 70,000 bonds to get one of these. And it's just completely unrealistic for an average player. I play World of Tanks almost every day. If there are bonds up for grabs, I grab them. And currently I'm sitting at 51k, which is not enough for a tier 10 reward tank. And imagine people like Swatch, who doesn't play as much as I do, or just your average Joe. How on earth are they gonna get these tanks? They practically can't. So one way that you could possibly solve this problem is to make it more even, but at the same time that may even make tier 10 even worse, because then everyone would be driving the Chieftain and maybe that wouldn't be fun either. I don't know, but at least we can all enjoy the overpowered tanks, and that would also make the overpowered tanks not so overpowered anymore. We don't know, we're just brainstorming here.
So the final solution that we have is the one that's gonna take the most effort and time, and would also cause the most new problems as well, though. But I think it's the one that Wargaming is trying to do right now, and that is just trying to rebalance all the other tanks, the non-meta tanks, which is why we see a small influx of rebalance now and then, like the E100,
yeah.
STB, the E50.
So if we have the high tier meta tanks up here, and we have the not so competitive tanks here, instead of nerfing those tanks, you could just bring all the other tanks up. But as Wash was talking about, this will also create another huge problem.
So the main problem is that it's gonna take a lot of time and effort. You know, rebalancing a bunch of tanks, just rebalancing a few tanks, there's a huge risk that they will be overpowered. And this is something that Wargaming knows, and this is why it's taking so incredibly long time for just the tanks that we have seen a rebalance from, like the E100 that we mentioned. Like, when was the time that we first get to know that they were going to be rebalanced?
I think the community has been crying about buffs for tanks like the E100 and the IS-4 for, well, almost as long as I can remember. maybe 5-6 years possibly. From Wargaming recognizing this and actually made a post, or even was a video, I'm not sure, where they said like these tanks, and then they had like a list, are gonna get buffed soon. From that day to the day where they actually added them into the game, buff, it was like 1.5 or 2 years. Imagine Wargaming doing that with all 60 tanks. It would... it's not really realistic. Unless they like completely remake the whole rebalancing process.
If they want to take this approach with all the non-meta tanks, it's gonna take like 20 years for tier 10 to be balanced.
I don't think all the tanks is gonna be around in 20 years. What?
No. So, I mean, so either Wargaming, you keep at it with this process and never be done, or you try and speed it up and I don't know, take some risks. It's difficult to actually say what should be done, but that's the final proposition that we have.
And on top of all this, it's not like buffing, nerfing, rebalancing around 60 tanks at tier 10 is enough. Because let's just say that you would make every not so meta tier 10 tank a bit better. That would also mean that you would probably need to take a look at every tank in the game that these tanks can also go up against, which includes tier 8 and tier 9. And there are a lot of tanks down there, which would make this process even longer. And it's just, with the current speed of Wargaming rebalancing tanks, it's completely unrealistic to buff tier 8, or rebalance tier 8, tier 9 and tier 10 in one go. It's just, it's never gonna happen.
Realistically, the simplest solution would just be, in our opinions, to nerf the reward tanks.
That would be a lot easier, but you would obviously upset the wrong people.
Let's hear your opinions about this in the comments.
Even if I worked at Wargaming like right now and I could just press a button and make anything happen, I still wouldn't be sure what to do, to be completely honest.
That was our rebalancing proposal for tier 10, and that is just one of many solutions that could improve tier 10 with an underline on could. The next solution to tier 10, but also applies to the entire game really, is map design. The reason to why most meta tanks are meta at tier 10 is because they can fulfill many roles at once. For example, the Chieftain. It's a heavy, medium tank destroyer almost. It has powerful gun, powerful mobility, powerful armor. It's got everything it needs to do to be effective on any map.
It doesn't really have any downsides at all.
No.
It has a lower plate, lol.
The reason to why the majority of the tier 10 tanks are like irrelevant is because they are specialist tanks that can only work on specific maps or specific situations. And this is a huge solution, gonna take a lot of time, but you know, it would be basically rebalance the maps so that it suits more specialist roles. This is obviously a huge solution and could also bring in new sorts of problems.
Let's just pretend, it's like on a fairy tale land, that Wargaming would somehow make more, if not all the maps, appealing to almost every tank in the game. I personally would love this. In my book, a good map is a map where no matter what tank you're playing, no matter the matchup, you will have a role to fulfill. But if you would do this, that would also remove these extreme games that you may find on YouTube. If you would add a big city on Malinovka, you would never see these 20k spotting games from EBRs. If you would put a huge field somewhere on Himmelsdorf, you wouldn't see these extreme games where heavy tanks or heavily armored tank destroyers do really well. Which could obviously destroy a lot of the fun for some people, because a lot of people, they enjoy getting these extreme games which are very RNG based. You pick a very specialist kind of tank, you roll a dice, hope you get a good map. And in ranked, for example, this is very noticeable when you play tanks like heavies, for example. You pick a heavy tank, you get a somewhat heavy tank suitable map, you can have a good game. You pick a light tank, you get Malinovka or Prokhorovka or Murovanka, you can have a glorious game. If you pick a light tank and you get a city map, you're f***ed. This would be thrown out the window. This wouldn't be a thing anymore, because no matter the map, you would still have a role to fulfill. But again, these extreme games would disappear, and it may in the long run be less frustrating, but it could also be less fun. So this is not necessarily a straight up solution, but it's an idea at least.
The next solution, and that is to fix the ammunition system. Wargaming tried to kind of rework special premium ammunition.
I still don't really understand why the community got so upset about it. So what they said that they were gonna do, and what they did on like the sandbox server, the base idea is that standard rounds should have less penetration but more damage. Premium rounds should have more penetration but less damage. For some reason the community didn't agree. I personally love the changes, watched a lot of the changes, but people were super upset about their premium rounds doing less damage for some bizarre reason. I really thought that this was going to be like the beginning of a new era of World of Tanks. This is going to be... Armor is going to become more relevant, weak spots are going to become relevant, it's going to become this epic new meta of World of Tanks, and it was scrapped.
I heard this like worry from people that, oh my god, if you make premium ammo do less damage, it's going to be a buff to super heavy tanks, oh my god.
Yeah, because the super heavies are already so good at this game, they're so meta.
Where would you place the super heavies in like a World of Tanks competitive tier list? They're probably at the bottom. They need this buff.
There was a time, not too long ago actually, where Wargaming completely overbuffed the mouse and the Type 5 Heavy. Remember that, Swartz?
Yeah, I do.
We obviously don't want to go back to those days, but that wasn't a result of Wargaming nerfing premium rounds. That was just a straight up insane buff to two tanks that didn't really need it, and then they nerfed them, you know, back a little bit. So I personally don't see a huge problem, and even if such a problem would appear, as Wargaming said themselves, they would just have to look at those kinds of tanks on an individual level. Every tank in the game that heavily relies on armor, they would just need to have a look at them.
Obviously, changing the entire game will create other problems. It will always do. If we want to make a positive change, we have to do these drastic changes and then come into like individually fixing the small problems afterwards.
So in a nutshell, premium rounds, special rounds, needs to be addressed. It applies to the whole game, but especially tier 10. And another solution for making tier 10 more enjoyable, well, I would argue the whole game, but tier 10 especially, it's to reduce the numbers of artillery players per team. But I would reduce artillery to 1 or 2 per team, at least to begin with. I know that there used to be a time where there was no cap at all, and especially now with all, as we were talking about earlier, with the stunning and the splashing, you're practically never safe, no matter what tank you're driving. You will always have an artillery piece harassing you on top of your ears, and it's annoying as crap. We did actually make suggestions to artillery, and we made actually link that in a card above somewhere to some ideas to suggestions. We've already been over that in the past, and especially with 3, there is no way you can keep count on where they are aiming or where they are shooting, because there will practically always be someone looking over you. When there's just 1 or 2, it's way easier to keep track of them. So now, for example, I don't know how many times where you see an artillery piece fire and miss you, and you think, oh, he just fired, perfect, now we can make the push. And then you forget to realize that there are 2 others who are reloaded, just ready to go ham at you. You push around the corner and you get absolutely wrecked. Anyways, so reducing them wouldn't solve the problem, but it would reduce it heavily. The downside of this may be that the queue system for artillery players may get longer.
We do care about all the players in some way, you know, but...
Yeah. That would be a solution if you don't want to dig into the artillery class as itself, which Wargaming already have tried to do, but...
Yeah, so it would either be capping the artillery pieces to a set amount which is lower than 3, or, you know, changing artillery altogether.
And as I said, we have made a long video about that in the past. It's a couple of years old by now, but it's still relevant, so I would suggest you go and check that out if you haven't.
Check the card above. So the next point of improving tier 10. Give tanks just generally more weak spots. Well, especially the meta tanks, which basically have no weak spots, especially around the turret area. So what happens here is you start spamming HE at them, and tier 10 becomes this HE shitfest, where people just stare at each other, hold down spamming HE. It's kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
And this is actually a complaint that I hear a lot of, like, competitive gamers in World of Tanks crying at. They don't cry about armor and premium rounds, they cry about high explosives. But what I think a lot of those players fail to understand is why are people spamming HE at your hold down chieftain?
High explosive is not the problem, it's the reason why people are spamming high explosives.
High explosives is a desperate solution to a problem. And the problem is not high explosives in of itself, it's because the game has become so stale that people have no other options than to ram them or to fire high explosives at your hold down turrets. And it's freaking lame. And this is especially noticeable in ranked. Like, the 60 TP has almost become meta because of how much turret armor there is. Because the 60 TP, it loads in like, what, 15 seconds? And with its HE shell, which is really powerful, you can do like maybe 300 to 400 per splash. And you have like decent gun depression and turret armor yourself. The problem isn't that people are lame and stupid spamming HE in the 60 TP, or maybe they are because I am. But the problem is that there's just too much armor and too little weak spots that people don't have any other option. So you could just introduce more weak spots, nerf already existing weak spots, or strong spots as you call them, or you could just take already existing weak spots like the ones on the Chieftains and the Crown Vine or STB1 and just make them a little bit higher. Just make them a little bit higher. Make them easier to hit.
This ties in with the nerfs we were talking about. So this could be a simple nerf to the reward vehicles, give them more weak spots.
Yeah, you don't need to dig deep into the numbers. You can just grab the cupola and just make it like maybe twice as high, or just maybe just 50% higher. Boom, done. Balanced tank. A chieftain with a high cupola would more or less be a T110 E5. Another solution to tier 10, we did discuss this a bit earlier. Again, it has to do with the matchmaker. You have too many tanks of extremes in the same soup of madness, and even when you're grinding up the tech tree yourself and get to tier 10, it usually doesn't feel as rewarding. You don't feel as powerful as you thought you would. And I'm not saying that tier 10s should always be top tier so you can slaughter tier 8s. I'm heavily against that. If I play tier 10 and I get to slaughter a tier 8 heavy, I feel zero enjoyment in that. It's stupid. I hate +2. No matter on which end of the scale I'm at, I don't like +2. So especially at tier 10, I would just remake the matchmaker or just limit it altogether like they have with low tier and just make it +1. +1, -1. So the most common game in tier 10, for example, could be, let's say 5 tier 10s on top and 10 tier 9s. Like with the artillery problem, you don't need to rebalance a bunch of stuff. You don't need to change that much. You can just reduce the shitstorm. Just reduce all these games where there are 15 tanks of extremes on each team and just give them 5. And out of these 5s, there might only be 2 or 3 tanks that have these extreme abilities instead of having 15. Give tier 10 more +1, -1 matchmaking. I don't like full tier 10 games, and I don't like +2 tier 10 games either. Give us more +1, -1.
Our final solution for how to fix tier 10 is creating like a completely different game mode or a completely new ranked mode that is permanent for, the competitive type of players and, keep the casual tier 10 at tier 10 randoms. This will ease up the environment at tier 10 as it is now and move, the competitive play to a new permanent game mode.
So this new ranked game mode, or whatever you would call it, that we would suggest to become more or less a permanent mode in World of Tanks tier 10 to kind of separate the casuals from the complete tryhards. You can make a system where there are no fucking bonus battles, no damn chevron system, no static ranks, no like insane grinds for a few weeks to reach the top. Almost any other game that's reasonably big, they have some kind of ranked or ladder system. And sure, most people, a lot of people at least, they strive towards reaching the top at some point, but for a lot of people it's more about challenging yourself and playing against people of roughly the same skill level. Because in the current rank that we have now, which is like a seasonal thing, that's not why people play ranked. When you play ranked now, it's a grind. You start from the bottom and you are trying as fast as you can to reach the top and then stop playing.
All this just to receive a tier 9 reward vehicle.
And bonds and some badges and some other rewards. You can still motivate players, you can still give them rewards for playing this new mode ranked system. But the end goal shouldn't be a pile of bonds and improved equipment and a new tier 9 reward tank that you can't obtain in any other way. You can incentivize them by giving them like maybe some camo, some badges, maybe some bonds, some credits. But the end goal of this mode should be for tryhards to try themselves and push themselves against people who are actually of roughly the same skill level, which I think this game would need at tier 10.
In most other games, being high in a rank doesn't give you a fancy tank. It's just basically like bragging rights and proof of your skill level. It's nothing that gives materialistic value really, and more of a sense of accomplishment at that game.
If this new dream ranked game mode would become a thing, we would prefer also if it leaned way more towards team play, obviously individual play as well, but more towards you as a team achieving victory rather than playing like a selfish in the current ranked system. It's so comical inside the current ranked World of Tanks. I know people make jokes about, you have a good game, you score 6,000 damage in your tier 8 tank and then you lose 15-3 anyway, and you say in chat, LOL 1v29. I would argue, unironically, the current ranked in World of Tanks, the ranked game mode, it is literally you versus 29 players. You are fighting against an entire enemy team of Tryhards, and you are competing against your own team of 14 players of Tryhards to earn chevrons. It's unbelievably stupid. I don't have the perfect solution for this, but you should be able to obtain ranks or progression or chevrons, whatever you have, based on your skill level along with your team to achieve victory.
So you should be rewarded for your team actions and your personal actions together.
I know it's very difficult for a server, a computer, to recognize a team effort, and we don't sit on the solutions for this. But for example, a very easy thing could be to simply reward the winning players no matter what. So even if you're in the bottom 5 XP wise, as an example, as you currently have ranked, you don't earn anything. But in this new mode, you would still be rewarded.
Everybody that wins should be rewarded. Like, for example, you could do nothing like statistically. Your entire team is standing around a corner and you need somebody to start the push. And so somebody could be like, hey, I will take one for the team. He goes forward, takes all the hits, so the rest of the team can make an advancement. Yeah. This guy has done absolutely nothing in pure numbers, but he literally carried the entire game by doing something that nobody else wanted to do. In the current ranked, he would get rewarded nothing.
If you want to speculate even further, maybe you could even do this inside the new 7v7. Maybe it doesn't have to be 15 versus 15, just to remove the sense of insignificance, because if you're one individual in a 15 versus 15 game, tier 10, like you can pull off 10k damage and still lose. It's quite ridiculous. So maybe in a new rank game they might want to reduce it to maybe 12, 10, 7, somewhere along those lines. I'm not sure if that's going to be the best alternative, but it would be an idea worth trying, I think. This could possibly solve another issue about the overpowered reward tanks, is that you could possibly allow these reward tanks inside this new rank game mode, because they're currently banned in the current rank game mode, which is a great change, by the way, Wargaming, to the current ranked. It made ranked from a complete shit show to just very boring and bad. So for example, if you could allow tanks like the Chieftain or the 279E in this new ranked game mode, but this is something that I've seen a lot of content creators been suggesting. I have no idea how it would actually be implemented, but imagine a feature where different tanks, based on their like general performance, have multipliers in like progression points or chevrons, whatever that is. So for example, if you do 3000 damage in a Chieftain, that's not worth as much as, let's say, your neighbor who did 3000 damage in an i7. The i7 will get more points than you. Or if you compare tanks like the EBR or the Manticore, if the EBR does 10,000 damage, 10,000 spotting damage, and the Manticore does 5,000 spotting damage, the Manticore will still end up on top.
So essentially you get rewarded for playing less competitive tanks.
Yeah, I would find that absolutely hilarious. I mean, eventually people are gonna figure out like the new meta tanks over time, like which tanks can they pick and still get the most points and that kind of shit. But I mean, again, as people play different tanks, these numbers should change, just like with how the marking system works and how the mastery system works, the badges system works. So that would be actually really interesting to see how Wargaming would implement that, and it would like, you would see so much crazy shit in this new rank game, but it would actually be enjoyable to play. It's gonna be very difficult to implement the system in the first place, but once it's in place and rolling and works, you can just let go of the levers and just let the system run by itself, and it would be a fantastic experience. I think it would be a lot of fun.
I would even consider playing it.
Yeah, I mean, you and your Sheridans watching your Jack Panzer E100. I don't have a timer right now, but I can assume once this video is done editing and processing, it wouldn't surprise me if this video is 30 minutes plus by now. It's probably going to be way too long. We're going to try to short it down as much as we can, but we feel that right now we could keep talking for literally hours, but I feel that this is where the line goes for today. We're not going to discuss much further, so we're going to try to round things off right here.
We might have explained something very badly, so if you have any questions, comment them down below. If you have any feedback, comment them down below. Do you have any own ideas? Comment them down below. And like and subscribe, and and all that juicy stuff, you know.
If this video gets enough traction, enough comments, we may consider sending this to Wargaming. If you really want to make your voice heard, you have a good idea, if you just want discussions going, there is a possibility that people from Wargaming are gonna read the comments of this video. So make your voice heard. Maybe if there are a lot of things that we maybe missed out in this video, or maybe you guys will provide so much glorious feedback in the comments, we may consider also making a follow-up video to this video.
Depending on the outcome.
But let's be real, we're just talking. No one's gonna watch this. It's gonna get like 10k. It's gonna get like 10k views. It's gonna be like a billion thumbs down, and all the comments are gonna be like, "Stop whining and play the Gross Tractor."
Nobody listens to Awesome Epic Guys actually talking, you know.
No. Hopefully next video is gonna be way more entertaining. Hopefully it'll be a lot more memes. We'll see you then, and thanks for watching this cluster of a video.
Load the fruchtring. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. Shovel of salt.